Imagine declaring war at 9 in the morning and being finished before most people have decided what to eat for lunch. That is not a metaphor. On August 27, 1896, the British Empire went to war with the Sultanate of Zanzibar. The accepted duration is 38 minutes. Some accounts stretch it to 40 or 45, depending on exactly when they start to clock. But 38 minutes is the record everyone remembers. Apparently, even warfare needs a speedrun category. The obvious explanation is that this must have been a tiny skirmish. A few soldiers, one confused officer, maybe someone fired by accident, everyone apologized, and history inflated it into a war. That would be comforting. It would also be wrong. This was a formal confrontation involving an ultimatum, a royal palace, thousands of defenders, multiple warships, artillery, a disputed throne, and one empire that had already decided the result before the first shell was fired. The story began 2 days earlier. Zanzibar was not an irrelevant speck of land that Britain happened to notice on a slow week. The island sat off the coast of East Africa, connected to major trade routes through the Indian Ocean. For centuries, wealth moved through its ports in ivory, spices, and enslaved people. By the late 19th century, European powers were dividing influence across the region, and Britain wanted Zanzibar stable, cooperative, and strategically useful. The Sultan still had a palace, a flag, and a court, but behind those symbols, British power was already deciding how much independence the throne actually contained. On August 25th, Sultan Hamad bin Thuwaini died suddenly. He had been friendly to British interests, which made his death inconvenient for Britain and extremely convenient for his cousin, Khalid bin Barghash. Rumors immediately spread that Khalid had poisoned him. No conclusive proof ever settled the question, but Khalid did not waste time waiting for a proper investigation. He moved into the palace, declared himself Sultan, gathered supporters, and acted as though possession of the building was the same thing as international recognition. Usually, that is a risky assumption. In Zanzibar, it was catastrophic. By 1896, Britain treated the selection of a new sultan as something requiring British approval. Under the political order created after the Heligoland-Zanzibar Agreement of 1890, Zanzibar sat firmly inside Britain's sphere of influence. The British wanted Hamad bin Mohammed on the throne. Khalid was not approved, not trusted, and from the British perspective, not negotiable. Khalid appears to have believed the British would complain, threaten, and eventually accept reality. This was a reasonable theory if you ignored the warships gathering in the harbor. The British delivered an ultimatum. Khalid had until 9 o'clock on the morning of August 27th to leave the palace, lower his flag, and surrender power. If he refused, Britain would open fire. Khalid refused. He barricaded himself inside the palace compound with roughly 2,800 defenders. That number sounds impressive until you examine who they were. Many were palace servants, armed civilians, and irregular supporters. They had rifles, a few machine guns, and several artillery pieces, some of them old enough to qualify as historical exhibits during the battle they were about to fight. Khalid also had a navy. Technically, the royal yacht, HMS Glasgow, was a wooden vessel modeled after a British ship. It was armed, floating, and loyal to the Sultan. Those were its main advantages. Across the harbor, Rear Admiral Harry Rawson assembled a British force that belonged to a completely different technological universe. 3 modern cruisers and 2 gunboats aimed their weapons at the palace. Around 150 British Marines and sailors were prepared to land. They were supported by roughly 900 local Zanzibari soldiers loyal to the British-backed government. This was not 2 equal states preparing for battle. It was an imperial fleet arranging furniture. As the deadline approached, British officers still gave Khalid opportunities to surrender. His representatives insisted that he did not believe the British would actually fire. At 9 o'clock, the ultimatum expired. 2 minutes later, the British answered the question. At 9:02, the fleet opened fire. The palace was built largely from wood. Against modern naval artillery, this was less a defensive structure and more a very elaborate pile of kindling. Shells tore through the compound. Buildings collapsed. Fires spread almost immediately. Khalid's guns tried to respond, but most were disabled within minutes. The defenders had numbers. Britain had range, armor, training, coordination, and weapons designed to destroy targets far stronger than a wooden palace. Then came the naval battle. The Glasgow fired on the British cruiser St. George. This was courageous in the same way as throwing a chair at a locomotive is courageous. The St. George returned fire. The royal yacht was hit, sank in the shallow harbor, and settled with its masts still visible above the water. The entire Zanzibari navy had entered combat and become underwater scenery almost immediately. Inside the palace compound, the situation was even worse. Hundreds of defenders were killed or wounded as shells continued to strike the area. Smoke covered the palace. The Sultan's flag remained visible above the destruction, so the British kept firing. Khalid, meanwhile, had already left. The man who had called Britain's bluff did not stay to watch the full answer. Early in the bombardment, he escaped through a rear exit and reached the nearby German consulate where he requested asylum. Khalid remained inside the consulate, protected by diplomatic immunity. The British could not simply enter and arrest him without creating another international crisis. So the shortest war in recorded history was longer than the defeated ruler's personal participation in it. At 9:40, the Sultan's flag was finally shot down. The British ceased fire. 38 minutes after the bombardment began, the war was over. The human cost was grotesquely uneven. Roughly 500 Zanzibari defenders were killed or wounded. On the British side, one sailor was injured aboard a gunboat. He later recovered. That imbalance is the real story. The record makes the war sound amusing because 38 minutes is an absurdly short amount of time. It is shorter than many television episodes. It is shorter than an average commute. You could begin making a careful cup of tea at the declaration of war and still be waiting for it to cool after one side had lost its palace, its navy, its ruler, and what remained of its political independence. But the war was not short because everyone involved was sensible. It was short because one side had overwhelming industrial military power while the other had a wooden palace, obsolete guns, and a leader who misunderstood the willingness of an empire to use force. After the bombardment, Hamud bin Mohammed was installed as Sultan. Zanzibar remained a protectorate, but the message was unmistakable. A ruler could keep the title only while serving British interests. The 38-minute war marked the practical end of Zanzibar acting as a sovereign state. Months later, the Germans removed Khalid by boat and transferred him to German East Africa. Even his escape required imperial paperwork. The war is often presented as a strange historical record, but records hide meaning. 38 minutes does not describe how minor the conflict was. It describes how complete the mismatch had become. European empires could move warships across the world, coordinate local forces, deliver timed ultimatums, and erase resistance with artillery before breakfast. The negotiation was the deadline. The argument was the fleet. The conclusion was already loaded into the cannons. Khalid assumed that firing would be excessive, so Britain would choose restraint. Empires are rarely embarrassed by excess when excess is efficient. The palace burned, the royal yacht sank, hundreds were killed or wounded, the Sultan fled. Britain got exactly the outcome it demanded. The absurd part was not that the war ended so quickly. The absurd part was calling it a contest. If you enjoyed watching an empire settle a political disagreement before breakfast, subscribe for more strange moments where history becomes less reasonable the closer you examine it. And tell me in the comments, was this really a war or just an ultimatum with artillery?